On a Saturday in August of 1986, I arrived at Alfred University in rural Western New York, having earned a full academic scholarship. I had a duffel bag, a suitcase, a single box, and a boom box. That was everything I owned. I arrived with $300 I had saved all summer working as a cashier, but I quickly spent every cent on that semester's textbooks, leaving me with no cushion. I was totally unprepared. No one in my family had ever done this. We had no roadmap. I felt as if I had been dropped off on Mars. I was a first-generation immigrant, a first-generation college student, and English was my second language. But I had a secret skill. I had been an architect for my family's survival long before I was an architect of my own. Since the age of 10, I was the one translating documents, interpreting at medical appointments, and navigating systems my parents and extended family couldn't decipher. Back home in Spanish Harlem, life had a buzzing, noisy rhythm and a familiarity, but it was also a documented war zone. I grew up on East 100th Street, the worst block in New York City. In an article written by the New York Times in 1982, they stated the following. Among the officers, this street of 100th Street is known as the worst block in the precinct. A block, they say, that is rife with gambling, unlicensed handguns, wanted criminals, and most of all, illegal drug use and dealing. It was a block that perhaps more than any other in the precinct illustrates the intractability of drug-related crime in poor neighborhoods and the limited power of the police to do something about it. A torpedo might help, said Officer Robert Freeman. If we were looking for a block that ought to be destroyed, you could run a torpedo down it. 100th Street would be your best bet. This was the block where I grew up. Peril was my wallpaper. It was common during most winters that the furnace would break, leaving us without heat or hot water for weeks. I remember one such winter specifically. It got so cold inside our apartment that I woke up to find my goldfish, my only pets, suspended in ice, frozen to death. On that block, drug dealers claimed our first floor hallway as their winter storefront. In the summer, they sold directly from my windowsill. I dreaded the warm months because their music vibrated through my walls until 3 a.m. Yet somehow, I still had to get myself up every morning and make it to school without missing a beat. Since my parents left for their factory jobs in the early dawn hours, that discipline was mine alone to maintain. I lived in perpetual hypervigilance, but I clung to one truth. Education was the only ticket off that block. When I arrived at Alfred that fall, the silence was a shock to my system. I wasn't just a newly arrived student. I was a shut-off observer, and soon after, completely miserable. I realized for the first time that I was a racial minority. I realized I was broke. I worked as a teaching assistant for the Spanish department for $4 an hour, taking home about $48 every 2 weeks. Because I had defied my parents by leaving, I couldn't tell them I was floundering. When they called every Sunday on the dorm payphone, I used my translator skills to paint a picture of a perfect life. But somehow my parents knew, and every 2 weeks, as poor as they were, they would send me $10 in an envelope. To some, $10 is a lunch. To me, it was the only extra money I had. Just as I was struggling to find my footing mentally, I lost it physically. I decided to join the rugby team, and during one game, an opponent hyperextended my knee and tore my ACL completely. In 1986, laparoscopic surgery was at its infancy. They couldn't just repair the tear. Instead, I underwent 9 hours of reconstructive surgery at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester. I told my parents not to come. I didn't want them to see me broken because I knew that if they came, they would take me home to recuperate, and that would mean never returning to Alfred. Instead, I called my boss at AU, Spanish professor Dr. Trice. He and his wife drove from Alfred to pick me up. I returned to campus with a 15-pound plaster cast extending from my hip to my ankle and on crutches. Alfred is not a fully handicap-friendly campus today. It was far worse then. I struggled physically, which meant I struggled academically. And I was perpetually exhausted, dragging myself and my textbooks through the snow and hills of Alfred. Because I had to return to Rochester periodically to remove the 30 stitches, swap out the cast for an immobilizer brace, and eventually a walking brace, I spent an entire year relearning how to walk. I had no car, I had no money. Every cent of my teaching assistant wages I used to pay my classmate Peter just to drive me back and forth to my appointments. Peter was a godsend. He never asked for a dime beyond gas, but it meant my first year was doubly hard. Peter honestly was a godsend. He never asked for a dime beyond the gas money, but it really meant that it made my first year doubly isolating because I was limited in mobility and drained of my financial income. For me, there really was no pizza and wings at the AU sub shop. That was a luxury I could not afford. That first summer, I went home to decide if I would ever go back. I looked at my parents, and for the first time, I truly saw them. They were the rural farmers from Ecuador who had dropped me off and had stepped off a plane in 1970 with nothing but their ironclad fortitude and my brother and I in tow. I spent my whole life straddling two worlds, my East Harlem world and my very traditional Ecuadorian world. In a very traditional Ecuadorian world, a daughter only leaves home when she gets married. At 18, I was in no rush to marry. My dream had always been to go to college. By choosing Alfred, I wasn't just going to be the first in my family to get a degree. I was challenging my entire cultural upbringing. I realized then that my presence at Alfred was the harvest of the seeds they had planted 16 years earlier. Their risk was the foundation of my agency. I made an intentional choice to return for my second year, and I stopped looking for what Alfred lacked and started seeing the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity it offered. Historian Elsa Barkley Brown talks about a pivot, a moment where you change your perspective to see what others miss. I pivoted. I saw that at Alfred, I could finally be free of the hypervigilance and flourish in its safe, quiet spaces. I also realized that if I was not happy, the only person who could change that was me. So when I saw that there was no space for students like me, I founded the Latin American student organization, LASO, today called Grupo Poder. I didn't just want to attend Alfred, I wanted to have an impact on it. By senior year, it was time to test my Alfred agency in the professional world. During winter break, I attended a career fair in Manhattan and met recruiters from 3M, the Scotch tape Post-it notes company. Shortly after I returned to AU, they called to interview me at their New Jersey sales center on an upcoming Friday at 9 a.m. I asked if we could move it to 11 a.m. The HR director assumed I was in the city because he was a transplant from Minnesota. He didn't realize Alfred was 300 miles away and that I had no car, no license, and no $100 for the bus ticket. I didn't make an excuse. I figured that was my problem to solve. As luck would have it, I found out that the Fiat Lux school paper staff was driving to a conference in New York City that Friday, and I asked if I could ride with them. We left at 1 a.m. We drove through the night, arriving at 8 a.m. I took the subway to my parents' apartment, showered, put on my only suit, and navigated the maze of Port Authority Terminal to catch the bus to West Caldwell, New Jersey. I had asked for instructions in advance. Remember, there were no cell phones, no Ubers, nor the internet at the time. I walked the final 10 minutes from the bus stop and entered the lobby just in time for my 11 a.m. interview. After a full day of interviews, the HR director asked how my ride from New York City went. I told him the truth about my journey. He went quiet. He admitted that when I asked him to move the appointment to 11 a.m., he thought I was a lazy college student. After hearing my story, he realized he was looking at a young woman who would move mountains to deliver results. By mid-March of my senior year, they made me an offer to hire me as an undesignated requisition. In a company of 95,000 employees, 3M only hires 2 people a year under this status. It meant they had no vacancy in the company, but they refused to let a competitor have me. They offered me a $24,000 starting salary, about $60,000 today, just to be on the roster. They were betting on me before they even knew where to put me. I started at 3M on June 4th, 1990. For the first 6 months, I was a floater, moving between departments until a permanent position opened in the data storage division when someone left. But 1 week into my tenure, my new manager sat me down in the cafeteria. As he sat across from me, the smoke from his cigarette curling in the air, he said, "If it were up to me and the sales manager, we would have never hired you. If a customer ever complains that they can't understand your English, you'll be fired so fast your head will spin. I don't care who hired you in HR." I felt indignation and the sting of bias because all of my life I had worked so hard to prove myself. I wanted to curse him out, but I knew I had to maintain my composure. I knew something that he didn't. If you're determined to succeed, nothing will get in the way. If you have doubt, everything will. I have never doubted myself, so I simply replied, "I understand." Throughout my life, I have led with kindness, gratitude, and respect, even when it wasn't earned, a lesson I learned from my mother. Kindness is a superpower. It keeps you in the room when others want to kick you out. I stayed the required 2 years in that position, hit every target, and then used 3M's own rules to self-promote to the corporate headquarters in St. Paul, Minnesota. Honestly, after that first manager, my experience at 3M was wonderful. They trained me well, and I outworked the bias until eventually I was inducted into the 3M $1 Million Club. When I finally decided it was time to leave after 11 years, the same HR director who had hired me and believed in me so many years before and had watched my journey from that first day 11 a.m. interview to my final day as a top producer, he came to see me and he said, "You know, Marilú, you don't have to leave. I can barricade the doors." I was deeply touched. I realized that despite the obstacles I had endured, I had left a lasting legacy. He told me that if I ever wanted to return, the doors would be always open. This taught me a lesson I have shared with others ever since. It is vital that you leave an organization on good terms, even if you've had a bad experience. It is never wise to burn bridges. By refusing to let bitterness dictate my exit, I ensured that my character and not my grievances was the last thing they remembered. That Alfred agency followed me throughout my corporate career. I remember a high-stakes meeting for a library security contract. 3 competitors had pitched before me. As I reviewed the architectural plans for this new library, I spotted a fatal flaw. The sensors would be easily bypassed because the stairs were facing the wrong way. The township was about to waste hundreds of thousands of dollars on a system that would not work. A person without agency would have taken the commission and stayed quiet. But I told the committee, "I cannot sell you this. I refuse to be the salesperson of a failed project." They asked why they should believe me, a young woman in her early 30s, over my seasoned competitors. I told them, "I may be a salesperson for 3M, but I am the architect of my own character. I have to look at myself in the mirror every morning and live with my decisions." I didn't just close the sale. The library actually dismantled those stairs and rebuilt them so that our security system would be effective. By being honest, I didn't just sell a product. I built a foundation of trust and a lasting business relationship. Today, I lead with the same integrity as the only Latina Dean of a business and information science school in New Jersey. But my architecting has moved beyond the campus. I have stood before the United Nations on several occasions as a special envoy for social entrepreneurship and education. I advocate for rural women in developing economies to have access to microfinancing and education. I do this because I know firsthand the hidden potential that remains untapped in the developing countries around the globe. I don't just run a school, I architect global opportunities where possible. For my students at Felician University, many who are the first to go to college and who have had to grow up way too fast, I don't see lack of opportunity. I see untapped potential. Driven by this, I recently led the re-architecture of our entire business curricula to be data analytics focused, because I know that a business degree with a concentration in data analytics is a game changer. I also presented a $225,000 proposal for a new Center for Business Innovation, Analytics, and Artificial Intelligence to the university president. She fully supports this vision, and we are now moving forward to fund it. My standpoint, as the child translator, the woman who learned to pivot, is exactly why I see the future so clearly. I don't just run a school, I architect opportunities. I believe in living a life with purpose, one driven by the relentless desire to make life better for others. On my graduation day from Alfred, my parents stood on these beautiful Alfred Hills. They handed me a gold citizen watch, a grand gesture for people who had so little. My father apologized. He said, "I'm sorry, we didn't support your decision from the beginning. You made the best decision of your life." I told him no apology was needed. Their fear was just a different form of love. My greatest satisfaction has been making their final years financially easier, a gift I could only give because I took a chance on myself in 1986. We have all been in moments where we must decide how to move forward. You might feel like the girl with the duffel bag, scared, broke, or lacking a map. But remember, you don't need a map if you're holding the pen. The Alfred Agency is unique because these beautiful, lush hills give you the quiet to pivot and reflect. Your life is not a series of accidents. It is a series of choices. Your mindset is everything. So reflect. Is your misery self-inflicted or environmental? Decide. Use your agency to choose your mindset. Architect. Build a space you wish existed and build it with others in mind. Ultimately, the center of the world isn't a place you find. It's a life you build starting exactly where you are today. Thank you.